There have been various reactions to the partial unbanning of alcohol on the 1st of June. Some say that the number of trauma cases have surged, placing an extra burden on the healthcare system, while others maintain that people should be responsible for their own behavior. For more on this, I'm joined by psychologist Benedict Mhlongo. Benedict, thank you so much for your time. Now, a large number of violence in South Africa has largely been blamed on drug and alcohol abuse. How bad is the problem as it relates specifically to alcohol?
No, thank you so much for having me, actually, and good afternoon to the viewers also. I think it's bad in the sense that we must understand that addiction or any form of addiction has an underlying element of any mental disorder, it might be depression, anything, and people who indulge in a lot of alcoholic activities and stuff is a sense of escapism or reality, and also just owning that particular control again. So people are engaged in more activity that infer any form of aggression or any form of violence for that matter. So the mere fact that they now have access to alcohol, they have access to those unconscious type of mentality or spaces that it actually encounters a lot of liberation in their sense, which is actually not seen as something that's actually healthy, seen as violence and abuse, and then that's actually going on.
Now, while we still don't know too much about COVID-19, we do know that we have to social distance, wash our hands, and wear masks. Now, how badly has COVID-19 exacerbated the use and abuse of alcohol?
No, it has, because you must remember that this COVID-19 has an element of isolation. So we are social beings innately and stuff. This has actually targeted or challenged our culture in terms of how we greet one another, in terms of how we actually share spaces. So that the mere fact that we have that now, the alcohol or access to that is giving us the sense of social inclusion of some sort, but it's actually leading us more into exercising our power, exercising our roles in a very negative light, where it's just that we've been constrained, we've been actually confined. So now it's actually giving us that element of liberation that is actually now seen through violence again.
Now, obviously, COVID-19 and the lockdown specifically has affected people psychologically in various ways and mostly negatively. In the case of alcohol addiction, what are the warning signs there? I mean, we talk about drinking excessively, we talk about people who are functioning alcoholics. Just when do you actually see that there's something wrong?
No, apart from that, you're right. Apart from binge drinking and all of that, but there are certain elements or signs that one can see that this is an addiction. For instance, more often than not, in any other type of mental disorders, when you can't cope without this element, because remember, it's an escape. So if you can't find that escape, people who actually that is actually now affecting their daily functioning in the world and the spaces where they're actually skipping work or skipping meals or just wanting to be in their own isolation. So people snap. There's a lot of frustration that they actually exhibit. And remember, frustration here is just a secondary emotion. But the primary emotion that they're feeling is the pain, which is actually the inability to do what they want to do.
We know that during lockdown 4 and 5, that people could go to some hospitals and clinics to seek help for various ailments. What can people who have a problem, who see it in time and want to do something about it, do at this moment during level 3 of lockdown? For instance, not necessarily go to a GP, but go to a psychologist, someone like yourself, or maybe even a psychiatrist. What should they do?
No, they can actually, you're right, actually. They need to actually, because I think in level 3, not necessarily, but we are listed as essential workers, though. I've been seeing a lot of issues related to the addiction or the use of alcohol, actually, and the inability to use that. So people should actually seek out. We are available. There's a lot of psychologists that can actually assist you. In terms of myself, I work from that cultural perspective and the recognition of a lot of things within culture. So we readily and available to assist them. There's also psychic helplines that they can also call. They can research us on the internet. We are there to actually fully assist people by actually unpacking or deploying other coping mechanisms without this unhealthy ones that they're actually utilizing currently.
Now, we're told that there are various stages and levels of alcohol abuse, of drug abuse. Take us through some of these stages, from initial phase of, just over drinking and then trying to stop and then relapsing and going back again. What are some of these from a psychological point of view?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. But most often than not, what we actually use or see in patients who actually are suffering from such addictions, that the stages model, the model of change actually, where people actually have a pre-contemplation stage where the person is actually not thinking of actually quitting or stopping, where this is actually masked with a lot of binge drinking, a lot of after effects of saying that, listen, I'm not happy with my life right now, I might actually change. And also a stage of what we call contemplation, where this is a person actually stating that, listen, I want to change, I want to do things. Second phase is actually being active, where the person is actually deploying and putting things in part to actually assist them in terms of actually assisting that. There's also the last stage, which we call relapse. Relapse is actually in this sense not something that's negative, but something that's actually positive, to see that, listen, the mere fact that you are in the stage where you've actually relapsed is the fact that you've already started the fact of actually stopping and even acknowledging, listen, I have a problem, I've got an addiction. So relapse is just the stage that actually goes in circle. The stages of model where people want to enforce that change. So the stages are very quite difficult. So it's also not time constrained in terms of this stage. You can spend hours or days or months, but it's actually the mere fact that the acknowledgement of that particular stage states that the person's already started the change or the process of actually combating this addiction.
Now, I know we already touched on professional help that people can get, but given that alcohol addiction, in fact addiction as a whole, is a chronic mental disorder, can one wean themselves off an addiction?
Not really, actually. I would love to say people can use home remedies and things like that, but addiction is a very difficult mental disorder that people actually suffer. And addiction can actually be something as you wanting to do anything from coming back home, watching TV, or you want to take a long bath. That's already an addiction, but it's a healthy one. So an unhealthy addiction is just one that actually maybe in the form of a cultural perspective where we can have an intervention where the whole family sits you down, they talk to you, but again, there's no sense of readiness in that particular human being. So if there's no readiness, it's going to be difficult. So the readiness is actually comes where in the professional help where we can actually infer and encourage the person to be ready in a sense in the most modalities that we normally use in professional assistance like that. But traditionally at home, there's normally interventions in terms of family intervening, community, and more often than not, which is quite sad, is that the person needs to actually infer a traumatic event for the person to see actually this addiction is not actually good for me.
All right, thank you so much, Benedict, for your time. That was psychologist Benedict Mhlongo talking to us about alcohol addiction.